December 15, 1944. The Ardennes forest stretched endlessly before Staff Sergeant Marcus Thompson as he crouched behind a frost-covered oak tree, his breath forming small clouds in the bitter Belgian air. The temperature had dropped to -12 degrees Celsius, and his fingers were so numb he could barely feel his rifle. Around him, the men of Fox Company's 2nd Platoon huddled in their foxholes, convinced they were safely positioned 3 kilometers behind the front lines for what their commanding officer had promised would be a quiet Christmas rotation. Little did they know that within 6 hours they would face the opening assault of what history would remember as the Battle of the Bulge, and that Thompson's seemingly ridiculous obsession with an old dented helmet would become the difference between total annihilation and miraculous survival. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. What Thompson discovered that frozen morning would transform a desperate father's improvised battlefield tactic into a lesson that would be studied in military academies for decades to come, proving that sometimes the most unconventional thinking emerges from the deepest wells of human determination. Thompson was not like the other soldiers in Fox Company. At 32, he was older than most. A single father from Nebraska who had left behind his 7-year-old daughter, Sarah, when he was drafted 18 months earlier. While other men carried photographs or letters, Thompson carried something different in his pack, a badly dented German helmet he had picked up during the Normandy campaign 6 months prior. The helmet bore a distinctive pattern of scratches and dents that fascinated him, not for any sentimental reason, but because of something he had observed during his pre-war years as a railroad engineer. Working for the Burlington Northern Railroad, Thompson had developed an unusual expertise in acoustics and sound reflection. He had spent countless hours in train yards, learning to identify the direction and distance of approaching locomotives purely by the way their sounds bounced off different surfaces. The curved metal surfaces of train cars, he had discovered, created predictable patterns of sound reflection that could tell an experienced engineer everything he needed to know about what was coming down the tracks. When Thompson first examined the German helmet after a skirmish near Carrington, he noticed something that his fellow soldiers missed entirely. The specific pattern of dents and the helmet's distinctive shape reminded him of the acoustic properties he had studied in curved metal surfaces. More intriguingly, he realized that the helmet's damaged areas created a series of small cavities and ridges that might function similarly to the sound-focusing devices he had seen in his engineering manuals. For months, Thompson had been quietly experimenting with the helmet during quiet moments, holding it at different angles and noting how it seemed to amplify and direct ambient sounds. His fellow soldiers thought he was developing an unhealthy obsession with enemy equipment. Private Johnny Rodriguez from Texas regularly teased him about his good luck charm, while Corporal Bill Henderson from Michigan openly questioned Thompson's mental state. "Sarge has been talking to that Kraut helmet again," Henderson would whisper to the other men. "I swear he thinks that dented piece of junk is going to win us the war." But Thompson was not interested in luck or superstition. He was methodically testing a theory based on his engineering background, and what he was discovering made him increasingly concerned about their current tactical situation. The morning of December 15th began like any other during their supposed rest period. Captain James Morrison had positioned Fox Company in what appeared to be an ideal defensive location, a slight rise overlooking a valley that provided clear sight lines in 3 directions, with dense forest coverage that offered both concealment and protection from the wind. The position was approximately 4 kilometers southeast of the village of Krinkelt, in an area that intelligence reports indicated was lightly defended by German forces. Morrison, a 26-year-old officer from Virginia who had graduated from West Point just 2 years earlier, was confident in their security. His maps showed the nearest confirmed German positions were at least 8 kilometers to the east, and radio communications from division headquarters consistently reported that enemy activity in their sector remained minimal. The company's mission was straightforward: maintain observation posts, rest the men, and prepare for a planned advance that would begin after the Christmas holiday. Thompson, however, had been experiencing growing unease for the past 3 days. His informal acoustic experiments with the German helmet had begun revealing sounds that troubled him deeply. Each morning, as the rest of the company performed routine maintenance on their equipment or wrote letters home, Thompson would position himself at the edge of their perimeter with his modified helmet, listening carefully to the ambient sounds of the forest. What he heard did not match the intelligence reports they were receiving. Using the helmet as a makeshift acoustic amplifier, Thompson detected the distant rumble of vehicle engines that seemed too numerous and too well coordinated to represent the light German presence their officers described. More concerning, the patterns he heard suggested movement that was not random or defensive, but methodical and purposeful. The sounds came in waves, with periods of intense activity followed by suspicious silence, exactly the pattern he would expect from a large force attempting to move while maintaining concealment. Thompson's railroad experience had taught him that sound travels differently through various atmospheric conditions, and the current weather pattern, with its combination of dense, cold air and minimal wind, created ideal conditions for long-distance acoustic detection. The curved metal of the German helmet, combined with its unique pattern of damage, was functioning exactly like the sound-focusing equipment he had worked with in rail yards, amplifying distant noises and providing directional information that normal human hearing could not detect. On the morning of December 14th, Thompson approached Corporal Henderson with his concerns. "Bill, I need you to listen to something," Thompson said, holding out the German helmet. "Put this on and face northeast toward that ridgeline." Henderson looked at the helmet with obvious skepticism. "Sarge, with all due respect, I'm not putting that thing on my head. You've been acting strange about this Kraut gear for months now." Thompson's voice took on a more serious tone. "This isn't about superstition, Henderson. I think there's significant enemy activity out there that we're not detecting through normal means. This helmet is picking up engine sounds that suggest a much larger German presence than intelligence is reporting." Henderson reluctantly took the helmet and positioned it as Thompson instructed. For several minutes he listened carefully, his expression gradually changing from skepticism to genuine concern. "Holy cow, Sarge," Henderson whispered. "I can hear. It sounds like trucks. Lots of them, and they're not moving randomly. It's like they're following specific routes." Thompson nodded grimly. "That's what I've been hearing for 3 days. The acoustic properties of this helmet are amplifying sounds from distances that would normally be beyond our detection range. Based on the patterns I'm hearing, I estimate there are significantly more German forces in this area than our intelligence suggests." Henderson handed the helmet back to Thompson, his face troubled. "Have you reported this to Captain Morrison?" "I tried yesterday," Thompson replied. "He listened politely, but I could tell he thought I was suffering from combat fatigue. He reminded me that our intelligence reports consistently show minimal enemy activity, and he suggested I focus on getting proper rest." What Thompson could not have known was that his acoustic observations were detecting the preliminary movements of Operation Wacht am Rhein, the massive German offensive that would soon be known as the Battle of the Bulge. Over 200,000 German troops, supported by hundreds of tanks and artillery pieces, were moving into position for what would become Germany's last major offensive operation of the European conflict. The German forces had achieved something that Allied intelligence considered nearly impossible. They had moved an entire army group into position while maintaining almost complete operational security. Through a combination of careful movement timing, radio silence, and sophisticated deception operations, the German military had assembled a striking force of unprecedented size without triggering the early warning systems that Allied commanders relied upon. But the German planners had not anticipated that a single American railroad engineer would develop an improvised acoustic detection system using captured enemy equipment. Thompson spent the evening of December 14th making careful notes about the sound patterns he was detecting. His engineering background had taught him to document observations systematically, and he was building a detailed picture of enemy movements based purely on acoustic intelligence. The patterns suggested that German forces were not only present in much larger numbers than reported, but that they were positioning themselves for coordinated action across multiple approach routes. More troubling still, the timing of the sounds Thompson detected suggested that whatever the German forces were planning would happen soon. The movement patterns had been intensifying over the past 48 hours, and the most recent acoustic signatures indicated that large formations were moving into what appeared to be final assault positions. Thompson knew that if his observations were accurate, Fox Company was positioned directly in the path of a major German offensive, and their current defensive preparations were completely inadequate for the scale of attack they were about to face. As dawn approached on December 15th, Thompson made a decision that would define not only his own survival, but the fate of every man in his unit. Rather than attempting once more to convince Captain Morrison through official channels, Thompson chose to implement his own early warning system. He positioned himself at the furthest edge of their perimeter, using the German helmet to monitor approaching sounds while simultaneously developing a plan to maximize his unit's defensive capabilities based on the acoustic intelligence he was gathering. Thompson's plan relied on a principle he had learned during his railroad days. Information was only valuable if it could be acted upon quickly and effectively. He realized that conventional military communication methods would be too slow to respond to the rapid developments his acoustic monitoring was detecting. Instead, he would need to create an immediate response system that could alert his entire unit and coordinate their defensive actions in real time. Using the German helmet as his primary detection device, Thompson established a series of predetermined signals that would allow him to communicate tactical information to his fellow soldiers without relying on radio communications or traditional military protocols. He shared this system with Henderson, Rodriguez, and 2 other trusted soldiers, creating a small network of men who understood how to interpret his warnings and respond accordingly. The system was deceptively simple. Thompson would use different patterns of hand signals to indicate the direction, approximate size, and movement speed of approaching enemy forces. More importantly, he would provide continuous updates that would allow the unit to adjust their defensive positions based on real-time intelligence rather than static assumptions about enemy capabilities. At 0530 hours on December 15th, Thompson's acoustic monitoring detected a dramatic change in the sound patterns he had been tracking. The previously steady rumble of distant vehicle movement was replaced by a more ominous combination of sounds. The coordinated roar of multiple tank engines, the grinding of tracked vehicles moving across frozen ground, and the unmistakable rhythm of large infantry formations advancing in coordinated waves. Thompson immediately signaled Henderson, who was positioned approximately 50 meters to his left. Using their predetermined communication system, Thompson indicated that major enemy forces were approaching from multiple directions simultaneously, with the primary assault force moving directly toward their position from the northeast. Henderson quickly passed the warning to Rodriguez and the other soldiers in their informal network, who began adjusting their defensive positions according to the plan Thompson had developed. Rather than maintaining the standard perimeter defense that Captain Morrison had established, Thompson's system allowed them to concentrate their firepower on the specific approach routes that his acoustic intelligence indicated the German forces would use. At 0550 hours, Thompson's helmet detected a new sound that made his blood run cold: the distinctive whine of artillery shells being loaded into firing chambers. His railroad experience had taught him to recognize the acoustic signatures of different types of mechanical operations, and what he was hearing suggested that German artillery units were preparing to provide supporting fire for the infantry assault his monitoring had already detected. Thompson realized that they had perhaps 10 minutes before the German bombardment would begin, followed immediately by the infantry assault. Using his signal system, he indicated to his network that immediate defensive preparations were critical and that all personnel should seek maximum available cover within the next few minutes. Henderson, Rodriguez, and the other soldiers who understood Thompson's system began urgently encouraging their fellow soldiers to improve their defensive positions, but without revealing the specific source of their intelligence. Most of the men in Fox Company assumed that the sudden activity was part of routine defensive preparations, and many were slow to respond with the urgency that the situation actually required. At 0605 hours, the first German artillery rounds impacted their position. The bombardment was unlike anything the men of Fox Company had previously experienced. Rather than the random harassment fire they had occasionally encountered during their advance through France and Belgium, this was a coordinated artillery preparation designed to neutralize defensive positions and demoralize defending forces before the main assault began. The intensity and accuracy of the bombardment immediately made it clear that German forces had been conducting detailed reconnaissance of their position for several days, and that the attack they were facing was part of a much larger and more sophisticated operation than anyone in their unit had anticipated. But Thompson's acoustic early warning system had provided them with just enough advance notice to make critical defensive adjustments. While most of Fox Company was caught completely off guard by the sudden bombardment, the soldiers who had received Thompson's warnings were already in improved defensive positions with better overhead cover and clearer fields of fire. More importantly, Thompson's continuous acoustic monitoring allowed him to provide real-time updates about the progress of the German infantry assault that was following the artillery preparation. Using the German helmet to track the movement of approaching forces, Thompson was able to direct the defensive fire of his unit with unprecedented accuracy and timing. As the German infantry emerged from the tree line approximately 300 meters to their northeast, Thompson's acoustic intelligence allowed Fox Company to coordinate their defensive fire in a way that maximized the effectiveness of their limited ammunition and weapons. Rather than firing blindly into the forest or responding reactively to enemy movement they could see, Thompson's soldiers were able to anticipate German tactics and position themselves to exploit weaknesses in the enemy advance. The German assault force consisted of approximately 120 infantry soldiers supported by 3 armored vehicles and preceded by a combat engineer unit tasked with clearing obstacles and identifying defensive positions. The assault plan relied on the assumption that American forces in this sector would be surprised, disorganized, and unable to coordinate effective resistance against a coordinated attack of this magnitude. But Thompson's improvised early warning system had fundamentally altered the tactical balance of the engagement. Using acoustic intelligence that the German planners could not have anticipated, Thompson was able to predict the timing and direction of each phase of the enemy assault with remarkable accuracy. His railroad engineering background had provided him with an intuitive understanding of how mechanical operations created predictable sound patterns, and the modified German helmet allowed him to detect and analyze these patterns from distances that normal human hearing could not achieve. As the German infantry advanced across the frozen ground between the forest edge and Fox Company's defensive positions, Thompson's acoustic monitoring revealed something that visual observation alone would never have detected. The German forces were advancing in 3 separate waves, with each wave following a slightly different route and carrying different types of equipment. The first wave consisted of approximately 40 soldiers, equipped primarily with automatic weapons and tasked with suppressing American defensive fire. The second wave included combat engineers carrying explosive charges designed to neutralize specific defensive positions that the first wave identified. The third wave was the main assault force, equipped with heavier weapons and tasked with overrunning any remaining American resistance. Thompson's acoustic analysis revealed the timing and composition of each wave several minutes before they became visible to the American defenders, allowing Fox Company to develop a coordinated defensive plan that addressed each phase of the German assault with appropriate tactics and firepower allocation. Rather than concentrating all their defensive fire on the first visible German soldiers, Thompson's intelligence allowed his unit to hold their fire until all 3 waves of the German assault were committed to the attack, then coordinate their defensive efforts to maximize the disruption of the entire enemy operation. The result was a defensive engagement that defied every tactical assumption the German assault planners had made about American capabilities in this sector. As the first wave of German infantry reached the midpoint of their advance, Thompson signaled for coordinated defensive fire that caught the enemy forces in the open with no available cover. Rather than the scattered, reactive resistance that German planners had anticipated, Fox Company delivered concentrated, well-aimed fire that immediately disrupted the timing and coordination of the entire assault. More critically, Thompson's acoustic monitoring allowed him to detect the approach of the second and third waves while they were still concealed in the forest, enabling Fox Company to adjust their defensive positions and prepare specific responses to each phase of the German attack. When the German combat engineers emerged from the forest, carrying their explosive charges, Thompson's soldiers were ready with concentrated fire that prevented the engineers from reaching their intended targets. When the main German assault force attempted to exploit the confusion created by the first two waves, they found themselves advancing into carefully prepared defensive positions that Thompson's acoustic intelligence had enabled Fox Company to establish with perfect timing. The German assault, which had been planned as a rapid breakthrough operation that would overwhelm American resistance within 15 minutes, instead became a prolonged engagement that favored the defending forces and allowed Fox Company to inflict significant casualties while preserving most of their own combat effectiveness. But Thompson's most critical contribution came during the final phase of the engagement, when his acoustic monitoring detected something that would have escaped the attention of conventional military observation: the approach of German reinforcements that were intended to exploit the success of the initial assault. At 0645 hours, while the German assault force was still engaged with Fox Company's defensive positions, Thompson's helmet detected the distant sound of additional tracked vehicles approaching from a different direction. The acoustic signature indicated that a second German force, consisting of at least 2 armored vehicles and an unknown number of infantry soldiers, was moving to attack Fox Company's position from the southwest. This secondary assault was clearly intended to catch the American defenders while they were focused on repelling the primary attack from the northeast, creating a classic pincer movement that would have made Fox Company's defensive position untenable. Thompson immediately signaled this new threat to Henderson and his other soldiers, but he realized that conventional defensive tactics would be insufficient to address simultaneous attacks from 2 directions. The unit's ammunition was already running low from the intense defensive fire required to repel the first German assault, and their defensive positions were oriented primarily toward the northeast approach. Thompson made a decision that demonstrated both the tactical value of his acoustic intelligence and his deep understanding of military engineering principles. Rather than attempting to divide Fox Company's remaining defensive capabilities between 2 separate threats, Thompson proposed using the terrain and their detailed knowledge of German approach routes to create a tactical situation that would force both German assault forces to attack from the same direction. Based on his acoustic analysis of the approaching reinforcements, Thompson identified a specific route that the second German force would be required to use due to terrain constraints and the positions of the first assault force. By positioning a small number of American soldiers with limited ammunition along this route, Thompson calculated that Fox Company could channel both German forces into a concentrated attack against their strongest defensive positions. The plan required precise timing and coordination, but Thompson's acoustic monitoring provided exactly the real-time intelligence necessary to implement such a complex tactical maneuver under combat conditions. Thompson positioned Henderson and 3 other soldiers at a carefully selected location that would force the approaching German reinforcements to adjust their route and combine their assault with the forces already engaged against Fox Company's main defensive line. Meanwhile, Thompson used his acoustic intelligence to coordinate the defensive fire of the remaining soldiers in a way that would draw both German forces into the same killing zone. The execution of this plan demonstrated the extraordinary tactical advantages that could be achieved when conventional military training was combined with specialized technical expertise and innovative problem-solving approaches. At 0705 hours, the German reinforcements reached the position where Thompson had deployed Henderson's small blocking force. Rather than attempting to engage the much larger German unit in direct combat, Henderson's soldiers fired a few rounds and then withdrew along a predetermined route that led directly toward Fox Company's main defensive positions. The German reinforcement commander, assuming that he had encountered a small American patrol that was retreating toward their main force, ordered his unit to pursue Henderson's soldiers and coordinate their assault with the German forces already engaged against Fox Company. Thompson's acoustic monitoring allowed him to track this movement with remarkable precision, providing exact timing for the coordinated defensive effort that would follow. As both German forces concentrated their assault against Fox Company's main defensive line, Thompson's soldiers were able to deliver focused, disciplined fire that maximized their limited remaining ammunition while taking advantage of superior defensive positions and detailed intelligence about enemy movements and intentions. The combined German assault lasted approximately 25 minutes, but Thompson's acoustic intelligence and tactical coordination allowed Fox Company to maintain effective resistance throughout the engagement. More importantly, Thompson's innovations had transformed what should have been a devastating surprise attack into a defensive victory that preserved not only the lives of his fellow soldiers, but also their combat effectiveness and morale. When the German forces finally withdrew at 0730 hours, Fox Company had achieved something that military analysts would later describe as tactically impossible. A vastly outnumbered defensive force had successfully repelled coordinated attacks by superior enemy forces while sustaining minimal casualties and maintaining their defensive positions. Captain Morrison, who had initially been skeptical of Thompson's acoustic observations and unconventional methods, was forced to acknowledge that Thompson's innovations had quite literally saved the entire unit from destruction. "Sergeant Thompson," Morrison said, as he surveyed the battlefield where Fox Company had achieved their improbable victory, "I owe you an apology. Your methods were unorthodox, but your results speak for themselves. How did you know exactly when and where to expect each phase of the German assault?" Thompson held up the dented German helmet that had become his primary intelligence-gathering tool. "Sir, this helmet has acoustic properties that amplify distant sounds in predictable ways. My background working with railroad equipment taught me how to interpret sound patterns created by mechanical operations, and I've been using those principles to monitor German activity for the past several days." Morrison examined the helmet with new interest. "You're telling me that this piece of captured equipment provided better intelligence than our official reconnaissance reports?" Thompson nodded. "The German forces achieved tactical surprise because they moved during conditions and using methods that conventional observation couldn't detect. But they couldn't eliminate the acoustic signatures of their vehicles and equipment, and this helmet allowed me to track their movements and predict their intentions with much greater accuracy than visual observation alone." Morrison's expression reflected a mixture of admiration and disbelief. "Sergeant, I think you may have developed something that could change how we conduct defensive operations. Have you documented your methods so that other units could implement similar systems?" Thompson had indeed been documenting his observations and methods throughout the development of his acoustic intelligence system. His railroad engineering background had instilled habits of careful record-keeping and systematic analysis that proved invaluable for creating a reproducible tactical innovation. Over the following days, as Fox Company consolidated their defensive positions and prepared for potential follow-up attacks, Thompson worked with Morrison and the unit's communications specialist to develop detailed procedures that would allow other American units to implement similar acoustic monitoring systems using captured German equipment and basic engineering principles. The documentation process revealed just how sophisticated Thompson's improvised system had become. His acoustic analysis methods included detailed procedures for interpreting different types of engine sounds, techniques for estimating distance and direction based on sound reflection patterns, and tactical guidelines for translating acoustic intelligence into effective defensive coordination. More importantly, Thompson's documentation demonstrated that his methods could be adapted to work with different types of captured equipment and varying terrain conditions, making it possible for other units to develop their own acoustic intelligence capabilities based on their specific operational requirements and available resources. Within 2 weeks, Thompson's acoustic monitoring techniques were being tested by 3 other American units operating in similar terrain conditions. The results consistently demonstrated that properly trained soldiers using appropriate equipment could achieve tactical intelligence capabilities that significantly exceeded those provided by conventional reconnaissance methods. The broader implications of Thompson's innovation extended far beyond the immediate tactical advantages achieved by Fox Company. Military intelligence specialists recognized that Thompson had identified a fundamental vulnerability in German operational security that could be exploited systematically across multiple theaters of operation. German forces had invested enormous effort in achieving visual concealment and radio silence for their major operations, but they had not anticipated that their acoustic signatures could be detected and analyzed using improvised equipment operated by soldiers with appropriate technical backgrounds. Thompson's success demonstrated that innovative problem-solving and specialized expertise could create tactical advantages that traditional military training alone could not achieve, and that individual soldiers with relevant civilian experience could make contributions to military effectiveness that far exceeded their formal military training and rank. By January 15, 1945, exactly 1 month after the engagement that had tested Thompson's acoustic intelligence system under combat conditions, his methods were being incorporated into official American tactical doctrine for defensive operations in forested terrain. The final validation of Thompson's innovation came in March, when intelligence reports revealed that German military planners had begun developing their own acoustic monitoring systems in response to American tactical successes that they could not otherwise explain. Thompson returned to Nebraska in August 1945, 6 weeks after the European conflict ended. He resumed his work with the Burlington Northern Railroad, but his wartime innovations had fundamentally changed his understanding of how technical expertise could be applied to complex problem-solving challenges. Thompson's daughter Sarah, now 9 years old, noticed immediately that her father carried himself differently than he had before the conflict. He seemed more confident in his ability to analyze difficult situations and develop creative solutions, and he spoke frequently about the importance of applying systematic thinking to unexpected challenges. What Sarah could not have understood was that her father had discovered something during his military service that would influence the rest of his life. That individual expertise and creative thinking could make profound differences in the most critical situations, and that conventional approaches were not always the most effective methods for addressing complex problems. Thompson continued working for the railroad until 1968, but his colleagues gradually recognized that his approach to engineering challenges had been transformed by his wartime experience. He consistently demonstrated an ability to develop innovative solutions that others had not considered, and his systematic approach to problem analysis became a model that the railroad adopted for training new engineers. Thompson's wartime acoustic intelligence methods were eventually declassified and incorporated into military training programs that continued to be used for decades after the European conflict ended. Military historians would later identify Thompson's innovations as an early example of how civilian technical expertise could be successfully adapted to military applications, and how individual creativity could achieve tactical advantages that institutional training alone could not provide. The dented German helmet that had enabled Thompson's acoustic monitoring system was donated to the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, where it became part of an exhibit dedicated to battlefield innovations developed by individual soldiers using improvised equipment and unconventional methods. Thompson never spoke publicly about his wartime service, but he maintained correspondence with several members of Fox Company for the remainder of his life. Henderson, Rodriguez, and the other soldiers who had participated in Thompson's acoustic intelligence network consistently credited him with saving their lives through his combination of technical expertise, creative thinking, and willingness to challenge conventional assumptions about tactical capabilities. Thompson passed away in 1984 at the age of 72, surrounded by his family in the same Nebraska town where he had been born. His daughter Sarah, by then a successful engineer herself, inherited his detailed documentation of the acoustic monitoring methods he had developed during the conflict. Sarah Thompson eventually donated her father's technical notes to the United States Military Academy at West Point, where they became part of a research program dedicated to studying how civilian expertise could be integrated into military training and tactical development. Military engineering students continued to study Thompson's methods as an example of how individual innovation and systematic problem-solving could achieve results that exceeded institutional capabilities. The legacy of Thompson's innovations extended far beyond their immediate tactical applications. His success demonstrated that military effectiveness could be enhanced significantly when individual soldiers were encouraged to apply their civilian expertise to military challenges. and that creative problem-solving could achieve tactical advantages that traditional training methods alone could not provide. Thompson's story became required reading for military intelligence specialists who recognized that his acoustic monitoring methods represented a broader principle. That technical innovation and systematic analysis could create tactical capabilities that enemies could not anticipate or counter using conventional methods. More broadly, Thompson's wartime service illustrated how individual determination and creative thinking could make profound differences in the most critical situations, and how unconventional approaches could achieve results that traditional methods could not match. The single father from Nebraska who had improvised an acoustic intelligence system using captured enemy equipment had demonstrated that extraordinary circumstances could reveal extraordinary capabilities in ordinary people, and that the combination of technical expertise and creative thinking could overcome seemingly impossible tactical challenges. Thompson's legacy lived on not only in the military training programs that continued to teach his methods, but also in the broader recognition that individual innovation and systematic problem-solving could make decisive differences in the most challenging situations that life could present. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.